Welcome back to your Bestie in Freight podcast, where we talk about all things tracking, logistics, and the real challenges that come with this industry. Here we break down the issues in freight and logistics in a way that is clear, honest, and most importantly, useful. I'm your host Lida, and today we are diving into some of the most pressing legal and regulatory challenges facing the tracking and brokering industry. My guest is someone who truly understands these challenges for both a legal and business perspective. Professor Matthew, he's a supply chain lawyer, a professor, and industry expert who blends legal knowledge with practical experience. His philosophy is simple: you can't fully serve your client if you don't understand their business. Matthew, thank you so much to agreeing to come to my show, and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Lida. It's exciting to be here. I hope that I can help your audience understand these issues and hopefully not terrify them too much, though a little bit of fear is to be expected.
Yes, of course, you are a lawyer, so a little bit here, it's okay, fear. So, Matthew, many lawyers go into corporate, criminal law, or even personal injury. Why supply chain? Was it something you always wanted to do, or what inspired you to become a supply chain lawyer?
That's a great question. So my grandfather in World War II, he was a tank commander, and so he operated military equipment. And when he got home, he ended up starting his own trucking company called Leffler and Sons. And he moved freight, he moved grain in central Illinois, and he built a fleet of about 6 pieces of power. Unfortunately, he ended up getting polio and going to the hospital for 6 months, lost everything, went bankrupt, and that was the end of his career kind of as a trucker. But he became a mechanic. He was paralyzed, had trouble walking, but he was able to fix a commercial equipment and farm equipment and tractor trailers. Well, my dad learned that trade from him. And when my father graduated from college in 1976, he got a job at a company called Roadway. And this was before the age of deregulation, when 3 trucking companies moved to America: Yellow, Roadway, and CF. And they all competed to see who was number 2, because clearly Roadway was the best. But my father was a shop manager in the night in Chicago Heights. And so he managed union mechanics. He had Teamster drivers. And he spent his entire career in supply chain. Ultimately, in 1991, he started his own company because the trend at that time, Lita, was to outsource fleet services. And so my father, a very literal man, made a company called Outsource Fleet Services. And
Okay. So
what I
you
knew
were
about
kind of freight brokering outsource? What do you mean?
it was a company called Roadway Package Systems, and they said, we want to make UPS, but without the Teamsters. And that was an interesting idea, only possible through deregulation. Roadway Package Systems became FedEx Ground. And so my father's company, Outsourced Fleet Services, was one of the largest providers of maintenance for FedEx Ground for well over 20 years. And so I got to learn from him what supply chain was. And for me, supply chain meant my father was gone half the year. That was what it meant. But
Yes.
as I got into my own professional career, I ended up practicing law, defending trucking companies in catastrophic accidents and manufacturers and product liability, and ultimately went as a general counsel for my father's company. We had about 150 people in 6 different states. So I never wanted to be in this space, but there was never a path to not do it, because this is the
Absolutely.
thing that moves everything.
Yes, of course. Like being your grandfather and that, it makes sense to advocate for people in this space. And I think that's how, you best help others when you already went through the pain, or your parent or grandparent. So that's amazing. So Matthew, tell me what is one of the biggest misconception people have about supply chain law, because we don't hear about them a lot. Is there something you wish more people in tracking and logistics understand about the legal side of the business?
That's a really good question, too. I would say the biggest misconception is that lawyers are not there for a useful purpose. A lot of people think that we add friction into processes. They think that maybe lawyers are out for very nefarious reasons. But the reality is we serve a very important function of helping contracts become enforced and negotiated properly, de-risking or finding ways to limit liability, and ultimately you can't opt out of the supply chain. You're part of it, whether you understand it or not. And that's the same for the law. You don't get to opt out of the law. The law is what it is. And if you don't understand it, then no one's going to come and say, hey, it's okay. You don't have to understand this. No, it's going to happen. You're going to have to be bound by it, even if you don't understand it. So my goal has always been to demystify what law is so that people can understand and make actual choices that are good for their business and ultimately make them more money. Because if you do it right, you can run a very profitable business.
Of course, of course. I like it. So this is, one of the hot topics lately, broker transparency, and everyone is talking about it. A topic that won't die in this industry. Like I was a truck driver like 8 years ago, and I was like hearing about broker transparency. It needs to be transparent, and some people argue that it is a outdated issue that doesn't even belong under FMCSA anymore, like oversight. But what are your thoughts? Is broker transparency relevant, or should we just move on? And
It's it's a hot topic. You're right. It's a very hot topic. Here's what I would say about broker transparency. Let me set the stage. The FMCSA, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, is the organization, the administration that oversees our industry. And they're about $1 billion a year budget, about 1,000 employees. And they're tasked with the safety of truckers and motor carriers. And they, in that capacity, are managing or regulating 500,000 trucking companies, about 4,000 interstate bus companies, about 20 some odd thousand freight brokers, and millions of commercial vehicle drivers. And so the question I ask is, okay, I get it. You want to have transparency, but what is your core mission? What is the FMCSA really supposed to do? And it's about safety. So if you look at it through that lens, then you say, how are they doing? Well, you probably know this statistic, and many of your audience does too, but the national out-of-service rate for commercial vehicles, trucks and trailers on the road right now is about 21.5 or 21.6%. That means that 1 in 5 commercial vehicles at any moment is unsafe at any speed, which is to say, if I was a guy selling milk and I had 5 gallons of milk, Lida, and I said, you can choose 1 gallon, you buy a gallon, but one of them is unsafe. You'd say, Matthew, that's an interesting idea. I don't want to buy any milk from you, because if 20% of these gallons of milk are unsafe, I don't even want to have any of them.
Yes.
That's our business. That's what we do. And so when we talk about broker transparency, it's a distraction from the mandate of the FMCSA. But again, there's a long history of broker transparency in this business.
Yes, I agree. I want to share with all of the trucking companies. I think that would be very helpful, that they can have a broker transparency, and that is a way to go directly working with shippers. If they want to, have a transparency, that's what they have to do. And when I did some, research and find out that not any industry provides transparency,
Well,
no one is sharing their profit margins. Like we buy grocery store, whatever, even like lawyers or even real estate agents. We know some percentage, but we don't know exactly what it is. So I'm not sure why they are fighting.
So that's actually a really good question. How did we get here? And part of my teaching is around understanding where you came from, because you can't understand where you're going unless you know where you've been. In the old days, before deregulation, brokers weren't really a thing. They existed, but very small amounts. But there was this opportunity for helping motor carriers like a Roadway or a Yellow backhaul, help them find loads going the other direction. But the way that it worked back then was it was one transaction. The shipper paid the motor carrier, and then the motor carrier, the broker transparency movement, was actually about the motor carrier. It was, how much money did you get paid? Because I get 10% or I get 15%. So the entire...
So the carriers will pay the brokers? That's how it was?
Yes,
Wow.
that's how it was. That's how it was for decades and decades and decades. The FMCSA, when they were created after we had the deregulation and other acts that enabled the FMCSA, they just said, okay, well, let's take this thing from before and we'll just keep it going. We'll just keep it going. And what we have seen with the broker transparency, the regulation, for all the people who are like, which regulation is it? It's 371.3. It's a great regulation. Subsection C is the one that you have to produce records. But this is the idea was, You wanted as a broker to know how much the motor carrier was paid because you got a portion of the motor carrier's
Yes.
money. It
Yes.
doesn't work that way anymore. It's two
Yeah.
transactions now. It's a shipper and a broker doing one transaction. Sometimes
Yes.
the broker makes money, sometimes they don't. And then you have the motor carrier and the broker making a transaction. Two separate deals. But
Yes.
this movement has kind of gotten some people energized. And again, it's because they get distracted by what's really happening in the industry.
I agree. I agree. And also before when there was like a fixed 10%, now of course they have to know the rate so they can pay the 10%. But
I mean, this is what the motor carriers want to have access to everything the shipper paid. They want to know who the shipper was,
Yes.
how much the load paid, and we have a challenge with data security and privacy. These shippers do not want motor carriers to know this information.
Of course, of course.
And the other thing is you waive these things. Like almost every single broker carrier agreement that I've ever seen requires the motor carrier to waive their rights under 371.3. And
Yes.
if you don't like how much you're being paid, raise your rate or understand your cost of operating. This is the fundamental thing of a business owner. You don't
Yes.
make more money because you can go into a broker and say, how much did they pay you? It doesn't matter. That's not your business. Your business is safely delivering freight on time and undamaged. And if you can't
Yes.
do it for the rate, don't take the load.
Yes, I agree. Well, at the end of the day, contracts are everything in this industry. So whether a carrier or broker, you need to protect yourself legally. From a legal standpoint, what are the must-have clauses carriers should insist on when signing contract? Because like I have been a carrier, I also felt that carriers have better contracts, and as a carrier you cannot like change anything. You don't provide any contracts, you just like have to accept the broker contract. So what is your opinion about this?
Well, first, let me just give a quick disclaimer. Nothing that I'm going to say today is intended for legal advice. Nothing is supposed to establish an attorney-client relationship. If you think you need a lawyer, you probably do, and it's not me. So that is the key takeaway. But you bring up a really interesting point. The reality is motor carriers are far less powerful or far less leverage in negotiating with brokers because the way this business has shaped over the last 45 years is this explosion of small motor carriers, 1 to 6 pieces of power. And they don't have the resources to hire a lawyer to make a contract. So brokers who traditionally have at least a little bit more bandwidth for legal services are able to put up these contracts that are essentially what we call contracts of adhesion, contracts that you don't get to negotiate. If you redline it, they're just not going to do business with you. So that is one of the challenges as a motor carrier. I would say the best thing to do is look for reciprocity. So if someone's asking for indemnification, like I want you to pay on behalf of me if something goes terrible, looking for mutual reciprocal kind of relationships, so mutual non-disclosures or mutual arbitration clauses, things like that. But I would say if you have a contract that you're thinking about using, it is very important to have a lawyer look at it. You don't always have to, but it is important if you're signing a bigger relationship to look at having outside counsel. The real simple thing that I've realized in this business is the carrier reuse rate. So brokers might use one motor carrier and then never use them again. So it's a constant like churn of new brokers you work with or new motor carriers you work with. And that's really not the case for the really mega fleets. The mega fleets, they absolutely have contracts and they know exactly how to negotiate those things. So it's an interesting industry that is constantly changing, which is why I love it so much.
Yes, I agree. The only thing in logistics constant is that it is always changing, right?
Just wait a couple of days. It'll be different. Absolutely.
Yes. So you mentioned all of the statistics that we have, only 1,000 employees and over 500,000 motor carriers, 4,000 bus companies, right? And millions of CDL holders. So that's, really massive responsibility. Given these numbers, how well do you think FMCSA is doing its job? Are they stretched too thin or is there a deeper issue?
It makes me so disheartened. I mean, this is the reality. My goal, and everyone in this business's goal, is for someone to get home in the same condition that they left. Like, we don't want you to get hurt. We don't want you to get damaged. We want you to have a good, productive life. And as we deregulated the industry, it allowed a whole bunch of new entrants to come in. A lot more brokers, a lot more motor carriers. And I, to this day, cannot find anybody who says that 20% out of service is acceptable. It's not. I mean, you want to have the knowledge that your vehicles are safe. And this is not like, oh, there's like a little bit of conspicuity tape that's missing, a little bit of reflective tape is gone. No, it's brakes, lights, and tires, the things that make the stuff stop. And we live in the most distracted society in America. People on their cell phones as you're driving.
Yes.
So
Oh, yeah.
there's a challenge, and I think the FMCSA does not have the resources to do its own existing mandate, and the challenges they're going to face over the next few years with autonomous trucks, among a whole bunch of other things, is something we really have to pay attention to. Ultimately, Americans have to be more comfortable with things not being free delivery, and they have to be comfortable with things costing more because safer equipment does require motor carriers to charge more for their services.
Yes, I agree. So where do you think FMCSA regulations heading in the next few years?
Oh, and there's going to be
Because we
none.
just have a new president, and what do you think?
Yeah, so one of the things that the Trump administration has kind of gone off and done is saying we're not putting any new rules out. We're pausing the rules.
Yeah.
So the broker transparency is a good example. Broker transparency, the new proposed rule is that you must produce the records within 48 hours of the request in an electronic format. And there's a couple other nuances, but those are the two big ones. They're probably not going to put out a final rule. They're probably going to say that's enough. We saw a proposed rule on speed regulators, make the trucks go slower. That's probably not going to happen either. So my belief is the FMCSA will not get an increased budget, and they will ultimately not put out a lot of new rules. If I'm understanding what the Trump administration has said is for every new rule, they want to repeal 10. So I think the regulations are probably not going to get very onerous over the next 4 years.
Yeah, well, I think I agree with that, because we don't need more rules. We need to follow the rules that we already have, right? Because
It'd be nice.
every year we get a new and new and new, and then okay, what are we doing, with this?
One of the things that I struggle with, and so I like some regulations and I dislike others. One of the regulations that I continually talk about, I think people get surprised with, is the minimum insurance required for a motor carrier to haul freight interstate, between states. And it's $750,000. That number.
For liability, right?
For liability.
Cargo, yes.
And that was established in 1980. It has never been adjusted for inflation, has never been risen. And so we have what I believe a lot of poorly maintained pieces of equipment that are underinsured. Underinsured because if they are in an accident, that's like a week or 2 weeks in a hospital for someone who's been injured. So again, that's a kind of regulation I would be open to seeing, but nobody in this industry wants to see the insurance minimums go up because that would just bankrupt a lot of motor carriers.
Oh yeah, because insurance, even though the rate stayed the same, 750 and the cargo 100,000, but the insurance companies are always charging more and more with the same, requirement. That's why, of course, no one wants to increase. And then if the situation happens, it is very difficult to get some money from insurance companies. I had a truck driver friend in California. He's based out of in California. He had an accident in Iowa 2.5 years ago, and he he was good, but the truck was damaged, and of course he had to stop working for 1.5 year, 2 year, and he's still navigating. He didn't get anything from the insurance company. It has been more than 2.5 years. Also, for trucking companies, I realize that because the company is based out of in one state, but they are operating in all different states, it is very difficult, to fight for trucking companies if there is any accident or anything going wrong. What do you think?
I mean, the liability is the biggest challenge facing our industry. There's a case right now that's on appeal in the state of Texas, and this case is Blake versus Werner Enterprises. It's a terrifying case. I'll give you the kind of the facts, and so we can talk about what it means. But what happened was a truck driver was operating his commercial vehicle. It's a Werner Enterprises truck, well maintained, going under the posted speed limit. In the other lane, other side of the highway, divided highway, is a family in a pickup truck. There were 3 kids in the truck, and there was 2 adults in the front, and they were going too fast for conditions. That pickup truck loses control, crosses 40 feet of grassy median, and then within a couple of seconds of losing control, crashes into that truck operated by Werner Enterprises. And the one child dies, one child is rendered a quadriplegic, one is significantly injured with brain damage, and they ask the question, who's at fault? Who's responsible? Who is responsible for this thing happening? And it goes to trial, Lida. It goes to trial. And again, the driver in the pickup truck lost control because they were going too fast and they crossed the center line and they hit the truck that never left its lane going under the posted speed limit. And the verdict was this. The driver for the pickup truck was 16% responsible, 16. The driver for the truck, Werner's driver, was 14% responsible. Now, I'm no Jason Miller. I'm not a math guy. I'm a lawyer, but we're missing 70%.
Yeah.
That 70% was Werner Enterprises. They were found liable for over $100 million. They appealed that to the appellate court. They lost on appeal. And now it's in front of the Texas Supreme Court. And on December 3rd of 2024, they argued this case, saying it is not right that we are held responsible. But we don't know the outcome of this. So why are rates going up? It is a function of the liability truckers face. And so people can barely afford the minimum, let alone to go above that. Now, shippers are starting to change. Some shippers are demanding higher insurance for the truck drivers. But this is the world we live in, where verdicts are increasing exponentially. Tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. And how does our industry respond? It's very difficult to do that.
Yeah. Oh, that is very sad story. But why is the company responsible?
That's a great question.
I don't understand.
There are some facts that are not good for Werner. So number one, the driver for Werner was brand new. He had been driving for about 7 days. And in our industry, and again, for folks who are on the brokerage side, they may not understand this, but for the drivers and truckers out there, this is pretty normal. When you have a new driver, you have a trainer. And the trainer sits in the back because the trainer is actually a team driver.
That's how I learned,
we don't want to call them a team, but that's what they do because trucking companies do not have the margin, the operating capacity to have 3 people in that truck. So the trainer was asleep in the back. Now, it was also a winter weather advisory, so there was ice on the ground. And one of the things that people often kind of forget or don't realize is that you are not required to be trained on how to drive in ice in a DOT kind of getting a CDL. You're not required to learn how to drive in the mountains. You're not required to learn how to drive at night. You can get a CDL in as little as 6 weeks, sometimes even less. So this is
I think that's where we should start. Like even me, like I got CDL without like really driving good. I have to accept, I learned, parking as much as I could. I have learned the pre-trip inspection, but I know that I was not ready to operate, but they give me CDL. I think that's where we should start,
So that's a really good question. Now, here's the thing that I gotta kind of push back on. This is what we wanted. This is how we wanted the industry to work. When you look at deregulation in 1980, 80% of truckers were unionized, most of them Teamsters. They were making $38,000 a year. Adjust that for inflation, it's $130,000. How many over-the-road truckers are making $130,000 after taxes? Not a lot, not a lot. So the reality is we do not have the same kind of professionalism that we used to have. And so today, these mills just churn out people. Werner had their own truck driving school. This guy went to Werner's school to be a truck driver. And so even if we would want to see more training required, the industry does not want that. They do not want to make it. In fact, we saw a couple years ago, the apprenticeship program, 19-year-olds driving 80,000-pound machines, which is, again, is absurd.
I think it is not that industry doesn't want it. It is just like the supply and demand. We need truck drivers, and we need food, we need building material and everything, right? That to operate in this country, and we don't have enough qualified drivers, right? So we're giving opportunity to new drivers.
It's our fault as Americans. Like, we are addicted to things being cheaper. When Jimmy Carter signed the Motor Care Act of 1980, his belief was he would save consumers, American consumers, $8 billion a year. And he absolutely did. I mean, if you just, again, for inflation, you're talking 30 or $40 billion of
Yeah.
savings. And it comes off of the workers of the unionized drivers, mechanics, dock workers. And ultimately, we have this barrier to enter, whether you're a
Yes.
broker or a barrier enter to be a motor carrier,
Yes.
very, very
Very low.
low,
Yes.
very low.
I
And
agree.
if we were to raise them, it means that everything costs more. That might be great for the big motor carriers, perhaps, but for the small owner operators, this would destroy them. It would destroy them. And there's
Yes.
no like continuing kind of educational requirements for CDL operators. There's more we could certainly do, but it's a very tough thing to say, hey, we should make it so there's less truckers out there and have Americans pay more for everything, because
Yeah.
people just don't have the bandwidth anymore.
I agree. Well, I'm a big advocate of like smaller freight brokers and mostly carrier companies because I'm sure Werner has money. He can, fight himself. But what practical steps can you like give right now to navigate, the legal and regulatory challenges, especially for like small carriers and brokers when they are just starting out? Because like a lot of stuff is involved to get started out, like getting your MC, DCOS, and the IFTA and stuff. But like there is no any legal things that they prepare to get started. How they can protect themselves like the best when
Yeah,
they're starting.
the number one thing I tell anyone who's looking to get into this business is like, first, like talk to people who are doing it, right? Like, don't think that you can come into driving a truck, because a lot of people came in 2020 thinking, oh my gosh, it's $6 a mile, I'll make money forever. This
Yeah.
is a feast or famine. It is up, it is down, it is up. That is how it's always been. The most successful motor carriers can shed capacity, reduce costs, and ultimately be successful. So if you're looking to get started and you've gone through the process of actually talking to some people who do this, then view what you're doing as an exercise in planning, because that is what really boils down to. When you're a trucker, you need to take at least, let's say 10, maybe even 12% of your total revenue and put
Yeah.
that into a maintenance escrow account. Make sure you have money to handle things when they go wrong, when you break down or you need a new
Yeah.
tire, you need some repairs done. That's really simple stuff. But realistically, treat your business like you do your truck. You get your truck oil change maybe every 6 months, maybe once every few months, depending on how many hours or miles you're going. Do that with your contracts. Find an attorney who understands your business and helps you understand where the regulations are changing, ways you can become more profitable. And there's other just like simple techniques. Driving slower, believe it or not, is really good for your truck. Great for the motor, great for your tires, great for your maintenance. It means you take longer to get places,
And
but you
fuel
do save
economy.
money.
Yes. Yes, I agree.
And your insurers help you. And I'd also say you really want to invest in cameras. Even if you are a small trucking company, outward-facing cameras should be a requirement. They're not a requirement today, but your insurers will thank you if you have outward-facing cameras.
Yes.
The inward-facing cameras, more controversial, but there is a value for driver-facing cameras too. I
Yes.
think there's more in the bigger trucking company place. I don't see a lot of small fleets adopting driver-facing cameras yet. But if you save money on insurance, it's not a bad idea.
Yeah, I agree. Also, the deer protecting thing, I think that's very helpful to have in the beginning. Because I have
Absolutely.
seen some accidents with deers. They just jump in front of you, like out of nowhere. Like you are just driving and then they will just jump on you.
And if
Through
you,
the street.
and I also mentioned, like, if you have a problem with traffic today and you're not a truck driver yet, don't be a truck driver, because like all you do is you stop and you watch as people are absolutely insane on the roads. I mean,
Yeah.
again, like people on their cell phones as they're driving next to you, which is crazy to think about.
Yes. I when I drive, I always like respect truck drivers, see, like semi trucks, no matter if they did wrong, right, because it is difficult. I mean,
That's
I
right.
have been a driver. I know. I will just stop everyone so they go, turn the lane because sometimes they are heavy. Sometimes the truck is not in a good maintenance. We have to be more respectful as a society. But I have also had people who never been truck drivers and they get annoyed with truck drivers. They don't understand that, they have to give respect. to truck drivers on the road, on the highway, especially. Be very cautious when they are driving.
Yeah, when I used to work at the Illinois Trucking Association, we would bring a tractor trailer to a high school, and we'd
Yeah.
park cars all along the outside where the blind spots were. And you'd say, okay, see all the 6 cars? Hop in that truck and see if you can see them. And you're like, oh, I can't see any of them. Yeah, that's right. So give them space. Give truckers space.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, the trucker is not going to be injured in a collision. It'll be the people in the passenger
Yes,
vehicles that
because
get
they are
really
in a
hurt.
big truck and higher truck. Yeah.
That's right.
Matthew, thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation, and your expertise in both as a lawyer and educator really helps bridge the gap between theory and reality. I know our listeners will get so much value from what you shared. But before we wrap up, where can people find you if they want to connect with you or learn more about your work or they need your services?
Absolutely. So normally people can find me on LinkedIn, Matthew Leffler, or my website, armchairattorney.com. You can find me on X as Armchair Atty, A-T-T-Y, because why? A-T-T-Y is the abbreviation for the word attorney. I'm on Reddit. You can find Armchair Attorney. It's me just yammering about law and things. And I appreciate the opportunity to come here and talk about the things that help make America move. It's safely delivering freight on time and undamaged is not easy, even under the best circumstances. So if we're all aware of what's happening, it gives you the right kind of leverage to make the best choices.
Of course. Thank you so much, Matthew. And to everyone tuning in, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a review. This has been your Bestie in Freight podcast. Thank you.